Can you tell us a bit about that,
Yes.
that ecology of institutions?
Absolutely. So I've spent some time studying childcare centers. And often when people ask me, why are you studying childcare centers if you care about poverty and inequality, what I tell them is, you know, a childcare center is not just a place for childcare. It's an organization where a lot of things happen that are more typical of organizations that are typical of the space in which care is being provided. And what do I mean by that? I did a study in New York City where I did both survey work and in-the-ground observational and interview fieldwork. And the fieldwork took place in 4 neighborhoods, 3 high-poverty neighborhoods, one that was predominantly black, one that was predominantly Latino, one that was predominantly white, and then 1 neighborhood that was middle to upper middle class. And what we did is my students and I, we went and we just surveyed, we visited every single childcare center, we visited every single childcare center in each of those neighborhoods. And there were about 24 centers in all. We spent a lot of time in some of them, we spent some time in all of them. And we found a couple of interesting things. First, a lot of people were making a lot of connections in these centers. It turns out that if you're a parent of a 2 or 3-year-old, one of the most useful things you can have in your life is literally another parent of a 2 or 3-year-old. Because a lot of the problems that you're facing, especially among first-time parents,
Right.
are problems that this is a group of people who's most likely to understand. In addition,
And to have somebody to teach you, because they're going through exactly the same problems.
they're going through exactly the same thing. And in addition,
Cities enable us to learn from each other. It's one of their most important functions, right?
and for mothers who are like us,
Yeah.
that's the key. They understand your predicament. They're likely to have some information about some aspect of it that you don't, but they're likely to help you because they understand what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things make them extremely valuable sources of social capital. And what do I mean by extremely valuable sources? We looked at nationally representative data. What we can see is that even after you take into account their hardship before they enrolled in a childcare center, mothers who enroll their kids in a center and who did end up doing better, and who made friends, end up doing better than mothers who enroll their child in a childcare center and did not make friends, or that mothers who are comparable in every way we could see and didn't enroll their child in a childcare center. And what do I mean when I say did better? We measured 2 things in particular. One was material hardship and one was mental hardship. Material hardship is a simple indicator measure that uses the number of items from a nationally representative survey to capture how hard things are for you at a given time. Did your electricity get cut off because you couldn't afford the bills? Did you get kicked out on the curb? Did you, etc.? Mental hardship is essentially a depression scale. If we take into account what happened in the past, there was still an association. I'm pretty certain that there's a causal effect. Some of them were getting connected to, for example, the right kindergarten that allows applications from low-income parents because they have scholarships. Mm-hmm. And so that ended up being valuable information for intergenerational mobility, not so much for intragenerational mobility. But a lot of what ended up happening was that those connections ended up helping people prevent from falling deeper into poverty or allowing their poverty to let them fall into hardship. Yeah. Exactly. And we saw a lot of that. Now, part of what was interesting about this is that it was not just the connections among parents. It was the connections that the centers as organizations had to other organizations. So, for example, in some of the neighborhoods of immigrants, some of the childcare centers had connections to attorneys who would work pro bono.
Right, whereas these childcare centers are a way in for, so it's a way of reaching out from the community, a way of outside resources getting into the getting into the community.
Exactly. So it's not just a place for babysitting.
Right, right, right. Were there differences across the childcare centers? Were some more successful than others?
Yes, there were. And this is the part that was really striking. There were some childcare centers where the directors were committed to building social capital. And they would throw little pizza parties, and they would have little events for parents to gather and mingle time and so on. Those almost never worked. Almost never worked. the centers that were actually the most successful were the centers that had to pool the resources of the parents, essentially had to mobilize the parents' human capital to meet their goals, that in doing so ended up creating social capital for the parents. What do I mean by that? So most centers are, if they're for profit, they have very, very slim profit margins, and the majority are nonprofit anyway. And almost every center you go to will tell you there's far more that they want to do than they are able to do. Childcare is just simply quite expensive in the United States. And so as a result, if you want to, for example, take the kids to 10 field trips a year, you want them to see, they're in the middle of, stuck in the middle of the concrete jungle. You want them to see grass. You want to take them to a farm. You want them to see animals. You want to take them to the zoo. You want to at least go to the library, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Any of these activities cost money. And more importantly, they cost staff time. So the adult-child ratio that you can manage if you're in a room with the kids, it's much larger, it's much smaller than you can manage if you're out in a park or in a farm where the kids could dip in the pool, or in a zoo where they could stick their hand in the monkey cage and get it bitten off.
Right.
So you just need more adults per child if you're out. If you're going to do field trips, if you're going to take the kids out, if you're going to do these things that you think are ethical, you need, absolutely.
Once the parents are there, they bond with each other. They get to meet each other.
Absolutely. It's even more than that. It's not just the opportunity. You also need to get organized.
Right.
All their staff time is taken up.
And they require coordination across parents, right? So
they require
build
coordination.
social capital skills among those parents.
Exactly. So that's how social capital ends up being created. This is part of why I argue that the Child Care Center is an organization. And it's an organization that, in order to meet its needs, ends up creating social capital by pooling essentially the resources by taking advantage of the human capital of the parents, by encouraging or requiring sometimes parents to get together if they're all going to accomplish what they all want for the kids.
You've been talking a lot about social capital.
Yes.
I want to just close by sort of making the connection with cities. That,
yes.
We often think about cities as being skyscrapers and infrastructure, but
Exactly.
really the real heart of the city is the social fabric that's housed within it. And the whole point of cities is enabling us to connect with other human beings. And sometimes we have settings in which we've sort of grafted an institution on top of that city that doesn't respect that doesn't understand how to bond. But when those institutions work, they do what all successful urban social groups do. They bond, they use the density of contacts in order to work together. And that's why what you're telling us is so important in terms of understanding how these organizations function and how they sometimes don't function so well.
Absolutely. Half of what I've talked about wouldn't work in the absence of the aggregation that cities make possible.
Right. Thank you, Mario.
Thank you.
Thanks.